The sun was a brutal, unforgiving orange disk hanging low over the South African bushveld. For miles, the landscape shimmered under the heat, a tapestry of dry grass and thorny acacia trees that offered scant comfort. This was the world of Sarah Jenkins, a woman whose life was woven into the fabric of the savannah, running a modest but fiercely dedicated wildlife monitoring unit on the enormous private game reserve of Imvubu. Sarah wasn't just a park ranger, she was a conservationist, a caretaker, and often a mother to the wild creatures that struggled here. She drove her dusty, rugged Land Cruiser, affectionately nicknamed the Rhino, down a rarely used track, the vehicle groaning under the weight of water, supplies, and her constant companion, Buster. Buster wasn't a sleek, specialized tracker dog. He was a scruffy, medium-sized mix of beagle and something tenacious, possibly Labrador, with ears too big for his head and eyes full of gentle wisdom. He was a retired search and rescue dog who, thanks to a deeply sensitive nose and an almost unbelievable gentleness, had found a second career locating injured or orphaned animals without stressing them. Today, Buster's presence was a necessity, not a comfort. The reason for their unusual trek into this far corner of the reserve, a harsh, rocky outcrop known locally as the Skeleton's Hand, was a report from a drone operator, a distress signal, something small and stationary, tucked away, yet definitely alive. The thermal imaging signature was fading, dangerously so. The operator, a young man named Alex, who worked at the main lodge miles away, couldn't confirm the species, only that it was critically small and alone. Sarah drove slowly, her eyes scanning the broken terrain. The silence of the heat was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel and the ticking of the engine. She had a dreadful knot of worry tightening in her stomach. Lion cubs were the most vulnerable creatures on the savannah, and a lone one usually meant a tragedy. Either the mother was killed or something even worse. Lions don't abandon their young lightly. "Come on, Buster," she murmured, glancing at the dog who sat rigid on the passenger seat, his snout pressed against the window's fine dust, constantly tasting the air. "Show me, boy. Show me where the little one is." Buster gave a low, rumbling whine that was less about discomfort and more about focused concentration. He was locked onto a scent. His body language was unmistakable, ears flared, tail held low and barely wagging, every muscle coiled. This wasn't a casual find, this was a serious mission for him. Sarah pulled the Land Cruiser off the track, navigating a treacherous maze of boulders and scrub. She stopped the engine near a cluster of ancient, half-dead knobthorn trees, their branches twisted like arthritic fingers. The sudden silence felt louder than the engine's roar. "Okay, buddy, let's go, slow and easy," she whispered, grabbing her medical bag and a camera. She clipped a lightweight lead onto Buster's harness. He wasn't trained to track lions. He was trained to locate signs of life and gently guide his handler. And today, that was all they needed. Buster led her through the dense, scratchy undergrowth, moving with a surprising stealth for a dog his size. He didn't pull or rush, he just followed the faint, desperate scent trail. After about 50 yards, he stopped abruptly. He didn't bark or whine. He simply sat, his head tilted slightly, staring at the base of the largest knobthorn tree, which offered a meager patch of shade. He looked up at Sarah, his big brown eyes communicating a profound exhaustion, almost sadness, as if the scent itself told him the story of the animal's pain. Sarah followed his gaze. There, partially hidden by the exposed roots and the dry, curling leaves, was a bundle of pale gold fur. It was a lion cub, and it was tiny, too tiny. It was curled into a ball, smaller than a house cat, its front paws tucked under its chest, its nose pressed into its tail. It wasn't moving. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought they were too late. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. She knelt slowly 30 feet away, keeping Buster close and quiet. Her fingers fumbled with the binoculars she carried. Through the lens, the details sprang into sharp, painful focus. The cub's fur was dull, caked with fine red dust. Its spine was clearly visible beneath the skin, a heartbreaking sight on an animal meant to be plump and robust. But worst of all were its eyes. They were barely slits, cloudy and sunken, utterly defeated. It was breathing, she realized, watching the faintest ripple of its ribs, but shallow, labored and infrequent. This was a creature in the deepest stages of dehydration and exhaustion. It had given up. She slowly detached the lead from Buster, knowing he wouldn't move without her command. She kept her voice low, a soft, soothing hum that was a lifetime of practice in dealing with distressed animals. "Hello, little one," she whispered, taking a slow, cautious step forward. "I see you. You're safe now." She knew the risk. The mother could be close, hidden in the shadows, watching. A mother lion, even a struggling one, would defend her cub with lethal, savage force. But the silence stretched on, unbroken by the low warning growl or the snap of a twig. The silence confirmed Sarah's worst fear. The cub had been alone for a long time. Buster, sensing Sarah's tension, remained perfectly still. But then, something extraordinary happened. Buster, without being commanded, took 2 tentative steps forward. He lowered his head, not in a predatory or investigative manner, but with the profound, non-threatening curiosity of a dog that understood suffering. He didn't make a sound. The cub, Leo, barely reacted. His tiny ears flickered, a movement so slight Sarah almost missed it, but he did not uncurl. He didn't even lift his head. Buster got closer, inch by deliberate inch, until he was just a paw length away. And then he performed the most gentle gesture Sarah had ever seen him do in the field. He lowered his head further and nudged the cub, not with his nose, but with the soft, cushioned side of his muzzle, a whisper of contact. This time, the cub reacted. It let out a sound so small, so weak it was barely a breath, a tiny broken squeak that was miles away from the roaring destiny of his kind. It was the sound of utter helplessness. He tried to lift his head, failed, and then slowly, agonizingly, he uncurled just enough to see the dog. For a moment, the vast, ancient hostility of the savannah faded, replaced by an intimate, silent exchange between 2 souls, the gentle dog and the desolate lion cub. That's when Sarah knew this was more than a simple case of a lost cub. The cub should have hissed or swiped, or at least shown the instinctual fear of a dog, a natural enemy in this environment. But there was only weakness and a fleeting moment of recognition. She moved in quickly, silently. She had only seconds before the cub used its last reserves of energy to panic. She positioned herself between Buster and the cub, reaching for the blanket she carried, a thermal, specialized one designed to capture scent and body heat. With practiced, firm movements, she scooped up the cub. It weighed almost nothing. It felt like a bag of brittle bones covered in thin skin and soft fur. The rescue was underway, but the fight for its life was just beginning. Back at the Land Cruiser, Sarah placed the cub, still swaddled, in a padded crate she had prepared. She didn't try to examine it too closely yet. The primary goal was stabilization and immediate warmth. She used a syringe to trickle a tiny amount of electrolyte solution onto its lips, hoping it would absorb something. The cub did not fight. That lack of fight was the most terrifying sign of all. As she started the engine, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a dramatic wash of purple and blood red. The temperature was dropping fast, another enemy of the tiny creature fighting for its life in the back. The race was now against the clock, the darkness, and the cub's rapidly failing body. We're just at the beginning of this incredible, high-stakes rescue. If this story of courage and unexpected friendship between the wild and the domesticated world touches your heart, take a moment right now. Please hit that like button to let us know you're invested in this little lion's journey, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss a moment of the amazing progress he's about to make. Your support helps us share more of these vital, emotional animal stories. Now let's get this cub home. The drive back to the main compound, which housed the small veterinary clinic Sarah managed, usually took 40 minutes. Tonight, it felt like an eternity. Every bump in the road, every gear shift, every squeak of the suspension felt amplified, a threat to the fragile life behind her. Sarah used her satellite phone to call Dr. Michael Tate, the reserve's consulting vet, a grizzled, no-nonsense man based an hour away, but always on call. "Michael, I have a male cub, lion, very small, maybe 5 weeks. Found alone at Skeleton's Hand. Severe dehydration, non-responsive, dangerously low body temperature. I'm heading back to the clinic now. Can you meet me?" Michael's voice, though calm, held the underlying urgency she needed. 5 weeks, Sarah. That's too young to be independent. Any signs of the pride? Negative. Buster was there for a while. No scent, no warning calls. I think he's been separated for at least 48 hours, maybe longer. I suspect something more than just wandering off. He has an unusual stillness about him, almost a resignation. I'll know more when I can get him under the lights. Right, I'm on my way. Start the warming process and run a full electrolyte panel the second he's stable enough for a draw. Get him on a glucose drip if you can find a vein. Don't push the fluids too fast. Slow, Sarah. Slow and steady. I'll be there in an hour and a half. The instructions were clear, but the execution was agonizingly difficult. Finding a vein on a skeletal, collapsing lion cub was a task for a surgeon. Sarah was a field biologist, not a vet, but she had years of practical emergency experience. The cub's life rested on her steady hands. She reached the compound, the lights of the clinic a welcoming beacon in the vast darkness. The moment she killed the engine, Buster leapt out, but instead of rushing to the grass, he stood sentinel by the back door as Sarah carefully lifted the crate. Inside the clinic, the air conditioning was set low, but Sarah quickly set up a heated mat and infrared lamp, creating a small, safe island of warmth. She lined a large, clean dog bed with soft blankets and gently transferred the cub from the crate. Under the harsh glare of the examination lamp, the true extent of the cub's plight became horrifyingly clear. He was even thinner than she first thought. His ribs were ridges, his fur was matted in places, and a small, ugly patch on his hind leg suggested a nasty injury, or perhaps a severe friction burn from dragging himself over rough terrain. As she began the slow, delicate process of cleaning his eyes and mouth with sterile wipes, she whispered to him, "You're safe now, little one. You're going to be okay. We'll call you Leo. It means lion, and you, my brave boy, are going to need all the bravery you can muster, Leo." A name that carried the immense weight of the destiny he might never reach. The hardest part was the blood draw. She cleaned a patch on his tiny foreleg, praying she could find the cephalic vein. It took 3 excruciating minutes of gentle probing, but finally a dark, sluggish drop of blood appeared. It was thick, a terrible sign of the dehydration. She managed to get the sample into the centrifuge. While it spun, she prepared the glucose and electrolyte solution, praying for a miracle. She decided against the IV drip for the moment, fearing the shock might kill him. Instead, she chose the slower, safer route of subcutaneous fluids, injecting the fluids directly under the skin to be absorbed slowly. She pinched the skin on his back, forming a small tent, and slid the fine needle in. Leo gave a single weak, protesting squeak, the only genuine expression of life he had given her. It was a good sign. He felt the pain, which meant he was still fighting. As the small bulge of fluid formed beneath his dehydrated skin, Sarah felt a wave of profound exhaustion wash over her. She sat back on her heels, watching the tiny rise and fall of his chest. The centrifuge dinged. Sarah ran the quick tests. The results were terrifying. His blood sugar was perilously low, confirming that he hadn't eaten in days. His kidney values were screaming. He was on the very precipice of systemic shutdown. There was a crucial, immediate need for protein and calories, but his system was too weak for solid food or even milk replacement. She needed to wait for Michael to green-light a specific formula. In the meantime, she wrapped him tightly in the blanket, tucking the warmed end of the heating pad close to his side. She sat down next to the improvised nest, placing a gentle hand on his back. His coat was rough and smelled faintly of dry earth and distress. It was during this long vigil, waiting for Michael, that Sarah noticed the second unusual thing. The first was the lack of fear towards Buster. The second was the pattern of the wounds. The scrape on his hind leg wasn't just a drag mark. It looked too uniform, too straight. And then she spotted a patch of skin on his tiny neck where the fur was missing. It wasn't bitten or clawed. It looked almost shaved, like something had been deliberately removed or applied there. Her mind raced. What would leave a neat, non-predatory mark on a lion cub? Poaching, a snare. But the wound wasn't deep enough for a snare. The unsettling thought hit her, heavy and cold. Someone else had been involved with this cub. This wasn't a natural abandonment or a simple predation attempt. This cub hadn't been lost. It had been handled. She ran her fingers gingerly over his neck where the fur was missing. The skin felt slightly tacky. She pulled out a small, ultraviolet light, the kind they used for forensic tracking of materials. Under the UV light, the tiny patch of skin on Leo's neck glowed faintly, a ghostly, silvery residue. It was a chemical, something synthetic and completely out of place in the wild. She recognized the smell faintly now that she was close, a disinfectant, possibly even a low-grade antiseptic used in human first aid kits. Leo, the tiny lion, hadn't just curled up under a tree by accident. Someone had left him there. But why? Who would treat a lion cub and then abandon it to the mercies of the cruel savannah miles from any human settlement? The discovery sent a chill through Sarah that no amount of heat lamp could ward off. The simple rescue of an orphaned cub was suddenly morphing into a complex, disturbing mystery. She looked down at the fragile creature, its destiny hanging by a thread, and made a vow. "I'm going to find out what happened to you, Leo, and I promise you, you're never going to be cold or alone again." The words were spoken into the quiet of the clinic, a promise made between a determined woman and the smallest king of the jungle, a promise that would define both their futures. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of anger and fierce determination, didn't leave the cub. The truth, she knew, was hidden somewhere in that silvery glow under the UV light, a man-made horror imprinted on a wild, innocent life. 2,000 words have now been written, detailing the setting, the discovery by Sarah and Buster, the initial assessment, the life or death drive back, the first critical stabilization efforts, and the disturbing discovery of the synthetic residue on the cub's neck, ending part 1 on a crucial cliffhanger that pivots the story from a simple rescue to a complex mystery. The clinic door swung open quietly, letting in Dr. Michael Tate, who brought with him the scent of antiseptic and the weary confidence of a man who had seen too much. He was a tall, thin man, his face permanently etched with the worries of the African wild, but his hands were steady and precise. He didn't waste a second on pleasantries. "Status, Sarah." Michael's voice was low, already focusing on the tiny, quiet bundle on the heated mat. Sarah quickly relayed the vital signs, the sluggish blood work, and the subcutaneous fluid administration. Then she showed him the patches of skin. "Look at this, Michael. Hind leg abrasion, but the real issue is here." She gently guided the UV light beam to Leo's neck. The faint, silvery residue glowed in the semi-darkness. Antiseptic. It smells like a low-grade disinfectant we used to use on livestock 10 years ago. Someone treated him, maybe even put a collar on him and then dumped him. Michael knelt, removing his glasses to get a closer look. He carefully inspected the tiny scratch marks on the bald patch of skin, pulling on a pair of sterile gloves. His expression hardened into a grim mask. It's deliberate. This isn't a snare wound or a scratch. It looks like he was restrained, and something was fitted to his neck. A cheap tracker maybe, or a makeshift identification tag. Something they wanted to make sure they could find again. Or perhaps something they wanted to remove hastily before abandoning him. The disinfectant points to amateur care, not professional handling. This is trafficking, Sarah, or a failed attempt at the illegal pet trade. The word hung heavy in the air. Trafficking. It meant that Leo wasn't just a victim of natural selection or a tragic accident. He was a commodity, stolen from his mother and pride, handled by ruthless, careless hands, and then discarded when he became too sick, too troublesome, or simply spoiled. Michael immediately took charge of the medical stabilization, while Sarah kept a constant vigil, gently stroking the cub's head with the back of her gloved hand. Michael set up a proper IV drip. It was a painstaking, heartbreaking effort, but after 20 minutes of relentless focus, a tiny plastic catheter was secured into Leo's barely there vein. The fluid began its slow, steady drip, life pouring back into a creature that had been on the brink of death. For the next 8 hours, they fought a silent, tense battle against systemic failure. Michael worked on the medication and nutrient balance, administering a specialized, highly digestible formula drop by drop through a syringe into Leo's mouth. Careful not to cause aspiration, Sarah maintained the temperature, monitored the drip rate, and kept Buster gently secured nearby. Buster. He was the only element of profound calm in the chaos. Sarah had kept Buster in the corner of the clinic room, giving him a bed and water. He was restless, pacing slightly, occasionally letting out a soft, concerned whimper. He didn't seem interested in the treats Sarah offered. His entire focus was on the small, fragile bundle of gold in the center of the room. Finally, around 4 a.m., the true crisis passed. Leo's breathing smoothed out. His body temperature crept back into the safe range. He still hadn't moved much, but his eyes, when Sarah shone a small penlight near them, reacted. The cloudy film was beginning to clear, replaced by the fierce, beautiful amber of a lion's gaze. Michael sighed, the sound of exhaustion and victory combined. He's holding. We bought him time. He's tough, Sarah. He's fighting now. With the immediate danger averted, Michael turned his attention to the evidence. He took swabs of the residue on Leo's neck and hind leg, bagging them for later analysis at a larger lab. We need to track this, Sarah. If this cub came from a known pride, finding the mother is critical for his future. But if he was stolen from outside the reserve, we have to find out who did this. Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. I've already contacted Alex, the drone operator. I'll have him reanalyze every flight path over the skeleton's hand for the past week, looking for vehicles off-road. I also need to check the security camera footage at the main reserve gates for any unauthorized movement, especially vans or unmarked vehicles traveling late at night. The medical focus shifted to recovery. Leo needed to eat, and soon. They introduced a specialized milk formula delivered by a small, sterile bottle. The first few attempts were heartbreakingly passive. Leo's instinct to suckle was weak, almost absent. It was the moment of truth. If he couldn't feed, the IV fluids would only sustain him temporarily. Sarah tried everything: gentle stimulation, warmed formula, soothing whispers. Nothing worked. Leo would barely latch on and then quickly fall back into exhaustion. Michael shook his head. His reserves are shot. This lack of feeding instinct is a classic sign of deep trauma, not just starvation. He's shutting down mentally as well as physically. Sarah's determination flared. She looked at Buster, who had watched the entire struggle with rapt, intense focus. "Michael, humor me for a minute." She approached Buster, who immediately got up, his tail giving a hopeful, querying thump against the floor. "Buster, go see Leo. Easy boy. Gently." Buster understood. He trotted over to the heating mat, sniffing the warm, unfamiliar scent of the cub and the medical supplies. He nudged his way carefully onto the edge of the large dog bed, settling down with a soft, comforting sigh. He positioned himself just behind the cub, acting as a furry, living windbreak, radiating the natural, steady heat of a healthy mammal. The moment Buster's warm body settled against Leo's back, a profound stillness fell over the lion cub. Leo's tiny body, which had been tense and rigid, seemed to melt slightly into the warmth. Then Buster did it again. He extended his muzzle and gave Leo 2 quick, gentle licks, right on the top of his dusty head, a clear gesture of canine comfort and acceptance. And that was the moment it happened. Leo, startled by the wet warmth, let out a tiny, irritated mew sound, and then, his eyes blinking rapidly, he instinctively turned his head away from the dog. As he turned, his mouth bumped the nipple of the feeding bottle Sarah had placed nearby. With a sudden, almost desperate surge of primeval instinct, Leo latched on. It was a weak, clumsy suckle at first, but it was there. He was feeding. The sight was emotionally devastating. The tiny lion cub, whose life had been hanging by a thread for days, found the safety and comfort he needed not in the arms of a human, but pressed against the warm, gentle body of a dog, the very creature that, in the wild, might have been a threat. The deep, ingrained trauma was momentarily overridden by the simple, immediate need for safety and sustenance. Sarah's eyes welled up, and even Michael, the hardened vet, managed a rare, soft smile. The feeding continued for 10 glorious minutes. Leo took a full 20 milliliters, a tiny victory that felt like winning the lottery. Sarah had to stop him, afraid of overfeeding his starved system. As soon as the bottle was removed, Leo sighed, a deep, settling sound, and immediately curled back up, not against the warm blankets, but right against Buster's soft underbelly, tucking his nose into the thick fur. Buster shifted slightly, carefully, and then settled his heavy head right next to the cub's, his large body enveloping the smallest king. The great hunter of the savannah, finding his first solace in the unexpected friendship of a rescued dog. This moment, the trust, the unexpected bond, the sheer fight for survival, is what makes these stories so powerful. We are witnessing the birth of a truly unique relationship, one that is saving Leo's life. If you feel that warmth and dedication, and if you believe every animal deserves a second chance, please take 2 seconds right now. Hit that like button to show your support and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement ensures we can continue funding these urgent rescue missions and sharing these incredible true stories of survival and friendship. Thank you for being a part of Leo's journey. The morning broke, painting the clinic in the gentle, hopeful light of a new day. Leo was still resting beside Buster, who was now sound asleep, occasionally twitching his paws as he dreamed dog dreams. With Leo stable, Michael had to leave, but he left strict instructions for Sarah on monitoring, medication, and the feeding schedule. The forensic samples would be rushed to the lab. Sarah was now alone, left with a sleeping lion cub, a fiercely protective dog, and a chilling mystery to solve. She started her investigation immediately, knowing every hour counted. The first step was contacting Alex again. She got him on a secure line, pulling up the reserve maps on her computer. "Alex, I need high-resolution data from the drone flights. Focus on the week leading up to the rescue, anything within a 5-mile radius of the skeleton's hand area. I'm looking for 2 things: tracks of an unfamiliar vehicle that left the main service roads, and any signs of human infrastructure, temporary camps, or unusual debris." "Alex, energized by the gravity of the situation, immediately agreed to pivot his drone operation. While waiting for the data, Sarah examined the security logs from the two main access gates to the Mvubu Reserve. The reserve was massive, but all non-game-related vehicles had to log in and out. The logs were clean. No suspicious vans, no unknown guests. If Leo was abandoned, it was done by someone either already inside the reserve, a highly disturbing thought, or by someone who entered through an unprotected boundary. The eastern boundary was the least secure, running parallel to a minor road that connected two neighboring farms. It was a common route for small-scale rustlers and minor poaching attempts, though nothing as audacious as stealing a lion cub had been reported recently. Sarah's attention was drawn back to the physical evidence, the scrape on Leo's hind leg. Michael had dismissed it as a friction wound, but Sarah looked closer. It wasn't just friction. It was a straight line, almost surgical in its uniformity, stretching about 3 inches. It was too clean for dragging on a rock. She recalled old reports from the black market pet trade, captures where animals were drugged and sometimes a tracking device was surgically implanted, or at least a large gauge chip. The straight line was where an incision might have been made, or where an amateur had tried to stitch a large wound that had already begun to open. The wound on Leo's hind leg seemed to confirm that he was physically restrained and potentially operated on. The question wasn't if he was stolen, but how? The mother. Where was the pride? Lions are fiercely territorial and protective. To steal a 5-week-old cub meant killing the mother or, more disturbingly, luring the mother away using bait or a distraction. She spent the next few hours cross-referencing recent lion sightings. The Mvubu Reserve had 5 known prides. The one closest to the skeleton's hand was Pride K, known for their large, robust males and a highly effective female hunting unit. They had recently been confirmed to have a new litter of cubs, but the count was difficult. It was impossible to know for sure if Leo was one of theirs without DNA testing, which was days away. She had to check. It was a high-risk move, but if Leo's mother was alive, returning him, even after temporary care, was the ultimate goal. She quietly slipped out of the clinic, leaving Buster in charge of the sleeping Leo. Buster lifted his head, gave Sarah a single, deep, low woof, a sound of acknowledgement and assurance, and then rested his chin back near the cub's flank. Sarah grabbed her rifle, her tracking gear, and a camera trap. The sun was climbing high, promising another blistering day. She had to go back to the scene of the crime. Her goal was to find the pride, check the cub count, and, most importantly, search for any sign of a struggle, a trap, or the metallic synthetic smell that Buster had picked up yesterday, the smell of human interference. Back at the skeleton's hand, the scene was different in the daylight. The heat was already fierce, but the light revealed details the dusk had hidden. Sarah spent an hour scanning the ground. Near the knobthorn tree where Leo was found, the dust was disturbed, but the tracks were confusing. Her own boot prints, Buster's prints, and the faint, dragging marks of the tiny cub. But 50 yards away, hidden in the long grass, she found it. A distinct, deep impression in the soft earth. It was a clear, heavy vehicle track, not made by her Land Cruiser. It was a smaller, less robust tire, possibly a large SUV or a smaller pickup truck, a private vehicle, not a reserve vehicle. And it was old, maybe 48 to 72 hours old, just as she suspected. The driver had gone far off-road, hiding their approach and exit. Then she found the piece of evidence that broke her heart. Tucked into a cluster of dry brush where the tire marks were deepest was a small, tattered piece of fabric. It was coarse, synthetic, and smelled faintly of cheap human detergent and something metallic, the same kind of chemical that had been on Leo's neck. This wasn't a natural fiber. It was a piece of a cheap synthetic blanket or a burlap sack used to transport the cub, to muffle him, to keep him contained. The cold certainty hit her. Leo had been drugged, snatched, crudely treated, and then dumped here because the plan had failed or the buyer had backed out. The people who took him were close, still operating nearby, and they had just lost a valuable asset. That made them desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. She took photos of the tracks and the fabric, carefully bagging the material. The rescue mission was now an investigation, and she was stepping into the dangerous territory of organized wildlife crime. She knew that the people who dealt in lion cubs weren't just petty criminals. They were linked to larger networks, often armed and ruthless. As she drove back, leaving the ominous silence of the Bushveld behind, Sarah looked at the samples in the bag. The fabric, the bloodwork, the UV residue, they all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Leo was a survivor of something far darker than the natural trials of the savannah. His fight had just begun, but now he had a warrior fighting with him. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, where the fate of one small, fragile lion cub and the safety of the entire reserve now intertwined. The world of wildlife conservation had just become personal, dramatic, and deadly. The little lion cub, Leo, was not just surviving, he was starting to thrive. After 2 full days of intensive care, he was noticeably stronger. His eyes were bright, fierce, and utterly focused on one thing: Buster. Buster, the calm, scruffy dog, had become Leo's lifeline. The cub still refused the bottle unless he was pressed right up against Buster's warm flank, hearing the steady beat of the dog's heart. When Buster moved, Leo whined. When Buster slept, Leo was silent. The ancient hunter, the future king of the savannah, was deeply, irrevocably attached to the gentle dog who had saved his life with a single, soft nudge. Sarah monitored the bond with a mixture of awe and heavy sadness. She knew what this meant. Every hour Leo spent with Buster made the eventual, necessary parting harder, but the work continued. Sarah received a call from Alex, the drone operator, who had spent the night reviewing data. "Sarah, I found it. It's faint, but there's a pattern. 3 days ago, a small, unauthorized vehicle, looked like a closed-cab pickup, not a reserve vehicle, entered the eastern boundary. It drove off-road near the Skeleton's Hand and returned to the boundary road 4 hours later. The heat signature inside was unstable on the return trip. 2 individuals, possibly 3. The pickup then left the area, traveling southeast toward the town of Vlakfontein, a small, dry town known mostly for its low-key agriculture and, unfortunately, being a known transit point for illegal goods. This gave Sarah a direction and a target. But before she could act on the vehicle information, the critical forensic results came back from the regional lab. The news was both devastating and confirming. "The DNA match is conclusive, Sarah. The cub belongs to Pride K. He is one of the 3 cubs they were seen with 2 weeks ago. We can confirm his mother is still alive, and our trackers report she is frantic, calling constantly in the evening." The tracker's voice cracked slightly. A lioness calling for a lost cub is one of the most painful sounds in the wild. The second piece of data was the most critical human clue. The silver residue found on Leo's neck was identified as an obscure chemical compound used in a specific brand of veterinary tranquilizer, followed by a local disinfectant manufactured only in a single facility in the province. The disinfectant's distribution network was small and easily traceable. Sarah immediately got on the phone. By cross-referencing the truck's known path towards Vlakfontein and the distribution list of the unique disinfectant, she found a connection. A small independent farm outside Vlakfontein, owned by a man named John Davies, had recently purchased a large quantity of the same disinfectant and had purchased a similar model of pickup truck 3 months prior. The puzzle pieces clicked into a terrifying picture. John Davies, a man with a struggling farm, was likely attempting to snatch and sell the cub for the exotic pet market, perhaps for a buyer in Asia or Europe. When Leo became sick, Likely reacting badly to the amateur tranquilization or treatment, Davies panicked and dumped the sickly animal back near the reserve, hoping the body would never be found or that the blame would fall on natural predation. Sarah immediately alerted the reserve management and the local anti-poaching unit. This was no longer a rescue. It was a criminal investigation, and she was the key witness. She shared all the evidence, the GPS coordinates of the tracks, the fabric, the DNA, and the forensic links to John Davies's farm. Within hours, authorities were moving on Vlakfontein. While the criminal justice system moved, Sarah focused on her own, more urgent timeline, Leo. He had been stabilized, but he needed his mother. Every day he stayed with Buster, he lost his instinctual fear of dogs and humans, making his eventual return to the wild almost impossible. The bond between the dog and the cub was now so profound, it was painful to watch. Buster would not eat until Leo had finished his bottle. Leo would play pounce on Buster's tail, a tiny, clumsy movement that Buster accepted with a patient grunt. They were inseparable. An utterly bizarre but deeply moving family unit. Sarah knew the moment had come. She knelt beside the nest, gently running her hand over Leo's soft fur. He looked up at her, those bright amber eyes already showing the awareness of a lion, but the dependence of a baby. "It's time, little man," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's time to go home, to your real mother." She had prepared for this. She had taken a blanket from the cub's nest and rubbed it extensively around the scent markings of Pride K's territory, the scent of the mother, the aunt, the entire family. Her desperate hope was to mask the human and dog scent that covered Leo, making him recognizable to his biological mother. The hardest part was separating Buster and Leo. When Sarah lifted Leo from the nest, the cub let out a powerful, protesting roar, the first genuine loud sound he had made since his rescue. It wasn't a sick squeak, it was the sound of a lion cub fighting for comfort. Buster sprang up, confused, whining and pushing his head against Sarah's arm, trying to get back to the cub. "No, Buster, stay. You did your job, my good boy. You saved him, now we have to let him be a lion." Sarah's voice broke as she tried to comfort the dog, who was clearly heartbroken, his ears drooping, his large eyes fixed mournfully on the small creature being carried away. She quickly placed Leo into a closed carrier, designed to block out outside light and minimize stress. The whole clinic room was filled with the terrible sounds of separation, Leo's frustrated tiny roars and Buster's low, aching whines. It was the hardest moment of the entire rescue. The reunion attempt was set for first light. Sarah drove the Land Cruiser deep into Pride K territory, a rocky, well-protected ravine known to be their denning area. She used a small, thermal handheld device to confirm the Pride's location, the mother and one other cub, and the Pride female closest to them, resting in the cool shadows. The tension was suffocating. If the mother rejected Leo, it was over. The cub would either be killed by the Pride or left to die alone again, having lost his crucial window for reintegration. Sarah, masked and covered in a scent-neutralizing suit, took Leo's carrier to a clearing 50 yards from the Pride. She slowly, gently, rubbed the scent-covered blanket over Leo one last time, coating him in the smell of his own kind. She knew the cub would be frightened, confused by the lack of Buster's presence. She opened the carrier and slipped back behind the cover of her vehicle, concealed in a makeshift blind, holding her breath. Leo stepped out. For a moment he was utterly disoriented. He did not smell Buster. He did not smell the antiseptic of the clinic. He smelled the dry earth, the harsh scent of wild grass, and the overwhelming, terrifying scent of lion. He let out a terrified cry, a sound much smaller than his earlier roar of protest. The mother, alerted by the cry, raised her massive, scarred head. Her ears swiveled, tasting the air. She stood massive and intimidating, her focus locked on the tiny, pathetic figure in the clearing. She began to walk slowly toward him, low to the ground, massive paws soundless on the earth. Sarah's heart pounded, a heavy drumbeat in the silent morning. This was the moment, acceptance or rejection. When the lioness reached Leo, she did not growl, she did not roar. She paused, sniffing the air furiously, clearly confused by the conflicting scents. Her own cub's essence mixed with the faint, persistent odor of dog and human. Leo, overwhelmed by the sheer primal power of the adult lion, did the one thing that broke Sarah's heart. He turned and stumbled a few steps, not towards the lioness, but in the direction of the rescue vehicle, where the familiar scent of Buster's last comforting presence lingered. He was looking for the dog. The mother, confused by the cub's flight, let out a heart-wrenching low moan, the sound of a mother who didn't understand why her child was running from her. Seeing the desperation in the mother's huge eyes, Sarah made a split-second decision. It was dangerous, non-standard, and utterly necessary. She reached into the vehicle and took out the old blanket Buster had been sleeping on for 2 days. It was saturated with Buster's scent, a dense, steady, non-threatening dog smell. Moving with excruciating slowness, Sarah tossed the blanket softly into the clearing, right between Leo and the mother. The lioness stopped, her attention drawn to the foreign object. She lowered her head and gave the blanket a long, suspicious sniff. She recognized the domesticated smell, the enemy, but it was a safe enemy scent, one that had been near her cub. It was the sacrifice. The mother had to accept the dog's scent, the presence of the helper, to get her baby back. Then she looked back at Leo, who was frozen in terror. Her massive head nudged the small, scent-covered blanket out of the way, and she gently, carefully nudged the cub itself. This time, Leo didn't run. He leaned into the massive warmth, the warmth of his true genetic protection. He gave a tiny, weak sound of acknowledgement, the first truly wild sound of recognition. The lioness lowered herself, and Leo instinctively sought her side. The other, slightly larger cub from the pride quickly ambled over, sniffing the newly arrived brother. The family was instantly reformed, the painful gap closed. Sarah watched, tears streaming down her dusty cheeks as the lioness stood and led her 2 cubs away, massive tail switching easily, disappearing into the morning shadows. Leo stumbled along, tiny against the towering legs, but he was home. The journey had ended. Back at the clinic, hours later, the air was quiet. Buster sat in his bed, occasionally whining softly, looking at the empty spot where Leo had slept. Sarah sat beside him, stroking his ears. Later that week, news came that John Davies had been arrested. The investigation confirmed he was part of a small network targeting young, desirable cubs for the pet trade. The proof, the vehicle tracks, the specialized antiseptic, and the abandoned cub was overwhelming. Justice was served, but for Sarah, the only thing that mattered was the resolution in the savannah. Sarah and Buster went on a patrol run days later. They found Pride K resting near a watering hole. Through her binoculars, Sarah counted the cubs. 2, healthy and playful. Leo was indistinguishable from his sibling, climbing on his mother's back, roughhousing in the sunlight. He was back where he belonged. Buster, sitting beside Sarah in the Land Cruiser, watched the lions through the dusty windshield. He gave a single, deep, low sigh, a sound of quiet understanding, of a job done, a life saved, and a silent goodbye accepted. The greatest rescues are often those where the heroes receive no applause, only the quiet knowledge that life has returned to its magnificent, rightful place. The tiny lion cub who curled up beside a tree, saved by the improbable kindness of a dog, was finally running free, the memory of his impossible friend dissolving into the wild, fierce destiny of the savannah.